My name is Steele Davis. I go by Mr. Steele, and I have been a professional pilot since 2014. I started flying FPV in 2014.
Can you think of like the sort of biggest and most impressive, maybe most recognizable sort of feature film or maybe a commercial, like something that would instantly cement your sort of credibility in the minds of the viewers?
I work with all kinds of companies like Ford and Red Bull and GoPro and Toyota, and I've done pretty much any FPV commercial with Ford or Ford or Toyota in the last 5 years. I've probably touched on it in some way, shape, or form, if it was either based in the US or even based in Puerto Rico. For example, I did a couple of things with Toyota in Puerto Rico. But yeah, like a lot of the FPV stuff up until recently was specifically GoPro and like feature film things that most of the majority of the mainstream are going to see. It was not FPV shots. They were all some kind of heavy lift with a big camera underneath with actual cinema lenses. So as far as like GoPro shots, yeah, I have a laundry list of things and places and people that everyone would know. But as far as like one go-to, I don't have anything specific.
I remember that BMW commercial. That was the first time I think that was the first time I saw like an FPV pilot in a mainstream commercial. You remember that one?
Yeah, I had forgotten until you mentioned it, but yeah. It's been I've been doing this, I've been flying pro, quote unquote, since I started flying FPV, so I've done so many jobs over the years that I just forget about them. But yeah, the BMW one was probably, honestly, the first big one that was outside of like GoPro and Red Bull, which those are necessarily, they're not huge companies, but people are, they know them and they're synonymous with FPV because GoPro is, the camera that we used, and then Red Bull is actually where the extreme sports, or most cases the extreme sports that we're filming are being sanctioned, I guess, or the people that are doing it, the athletes, are coming from Red Bull.
This is one of the ways that you're going to be a little bit different than some of the other people I've interviewed. Like Ciati just went pro like this year, and you've been pro much, much longer than a lot of other people. And probably the process you used, of you going pro is going to be different than somebody doing it today. So can you talk about like the first pro job you got? What was the first professional, like commercial or film or something like that, job that you got? Not like, FPV for YouTube.
FPV, I started flying like April to June 2014 is when I started flying, because I got the Toyota that I started with in December of 2013, and everything spiraled super quickly, and I was like in depth in it in 2014. So I had only been flying for like 5 or 6 months at this point, and it was late 2014, and I got a call for my first job. It was actually someone that had reached out to me from GoPro, and they sent me an email directly, and they were like, "Hey, this is blah 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 from GoPro motorsports department, and we would like to hire you, or potentially hire you, to film on this job here in Crandon coming up." So there's a big trophy truck race, which is I forget what they call it. They call it something. It's not technically trophy trucks. That's like Baja. I forget what they call it, but it's like, you've seen Vanover recently doing these shoots. There's like this big race in Crandon, Ohio, and they have these big off-road crazy horsepower trucks, and they do races with them. Anyways, they called me, and they were like, "Hey, we want to try some FPV shots." Again, this is like 2014. No one has used FPV at all for anything like pro at this point. As far as like a mini quad, yes, Trappy had done stuff with wings and whatnot, and like DJI style NASA drones that look up and down, like their TBS Discovery Pro. But as far as like a FPV drone, a 5-inch drone, I don't think anyone had ever done anything with a 5-inch drone. So they were looking at my freestyle videos, and they thought, oh, this is going to correlate really well with these trucks. Maybe he can chase them. So they called me, asked me. I had no idea what to charge. This was all like one-on-one interactions. I didn't have an agent. Again, I had just started flying, and I had a decent reputation in the community within that first 6-7 months, but it wasn't anything that was like over the top. And yeah, so they called, asked. I said, "Oh well, I guess I'll just let me do it for free." I actually offered to do it for free because I wanted to show them what it was capable of more than I really cared to get paid. Because honestly, at this point in my life, I had never made really that much money, and I was still just chasing this passion didn't really have any interest in necessarily making money at that time. I was more about like trying to show people what this was so that in the future they would see and like realize, and it would maybe lead to more jobs. So I was kind of like seeding the environment for maybe potentially getting more jobs. So like, I'll do it for free, just, you know, fly me out there and we'll be good. So I flew to Crandon and I did this job. And actually it's funny. So my first, this is when I had a blackout. I had a blackout mini 5-inch mini quad, and I was running 5.8 video, 2.4 radio control. And I had a GoPro. This is before this is the GoPro 4 Black launch. So the GoPro 3 Plus is what we had previously used. And honestly, I had been using a Mobius. Like I hadn't even really strapped a GoPro to the top. And for those of you who don't know, Mobius is like this trash keychain camera that we used to strap to the top of the drones. And anyways, like I had done a GoPro. I had a couple 3 Plus Blacks that I was flying. But this was the launch for the Hero 4. And I went up there, and it's funny. So I'm hovering over the start line, like maybe 100 yards, 200 yards in front of the start line. So they all start at like the sound of a beep or whatever, a gunshot. And they all like rush down this big long straightaway. And then there's this super gnarly right-hand downhill turn. And I'm like hovering above the start. And this is all mud. This is all off-road stuff because these trucks are massive. And so I'm hovering, waiting. The start keeps getting delayed. I'm like, I'm going to run out of battery at the time. Like drones flew like 2 minutes or something. So I'm hovering. And then my drone just randomly fail safes and falls into the track. And I'm like, yo, can we like stop that and go get it? And like, as soon as it hit the dirt, they rang the bell and the trucks took off, and we're just like roaring towards my aircraft that's sitting in the middle of the track. And it just got annihilated. Like the truck just, like a truck literally hit the drone and just exploded everything. And the one dude after the first lap went out there and grabbed all the pieces. And it was just toast. I still have the frame, but it's like annihilated. The GoPro is the only thing that survived other than like 2 motors. This was the angled motor mount days. I don't know if you remember that, but I had like the G10 3D or the G10 things underneath the motors that angled them forward. So moral of the story is I was down a drone and I had a backup, and it was a 6-inch alien because there was no such thing as a 5-inch alien. Chad Nowak was the only one in the world that had a 5-inch alien at the time. And yeah, so I flew my 6-inch alien, and that's the first time I started flying the alien. And yeah, moral of the story is that was my first job. And I ended up getting such good footage that they told me the next, like on this trip, they said, we have another shoot next week, which was like over the weekend. I was doing this job. And then on the Monday, they were going to fly me to Florida to do a James Stewart, which is a supercross rider. James Bubba Stewart. He lives in like Orlando, Florida. And he has this crazy compound. He's a super accomplished supercross rider that's sponsored by Red Bull. And so I ended up flying down there and doing that job. And they ended up paying me a substantial amount for doing that job. And then that kind of built my relationship with GoPro and Red Bull. And then from that moment on, I got called not frequently, but more frequently than anyone else at the time to do GoPro Red Bull stuff. But I kind of realized how much of a pain in the butt it was, and I would just charge adequately, which back then I was charging like $1,500 a day. Just like to show up. There was no such thing as like drone insurance. It was just you like show up on set and just fly drones and you make $1,500. There's no travel days. There's nothing. So like the rates they were good, especially at the time, but it was just a super specialized thing. And it was honestly, the gear was just borderline good enough to do what they were asking.
So you got your first job by basically being, tell me if you disagree with this, but you got your first job by basically being one of sort of the most prominent, well-known sort of FPV freestyle pilots. And so when they wanted somebody, they just were like, okay, this Mr. Steele guy, let's call him. Do you think that that's a strategy that people could use, especially today where there's a lot more saturated market?
Yeah. So for me, as far as like getting jobs, I do think that having an online presence was the reason I got these jobs. And it was, for me, I was just flying and having fun. But to like the outside world, obviously, you see someone fly freestyle and you're like, wow, that's impressive. But most people don't even comprehend what's happening. So for at the time, because drones were so new and freestyle was such a niche thing, to fly around cars and stuff, that was like something that people looked for, and the market was not saturated, obviously, as it is now. So as far as a viable option for people that are currently trying to become pro, and they, I do think there is a way to go online and make yourself known without necessarily becoming like a quote unquote top tier, like someone super, super prominent. Because to be fair, like FPV this day and age, if you were to come, I don't care if you're the best pilot in the world, you need like 50 things to go perfectly right for you to even become not even a household name in FPV, but just someone that 5% of the community knows about. You have to have all these things go for you. And there are pilots out there that are massive, that are only known in one niche of the community. So I'll give you an example of people that are doing this and becoming professional as far as using social media to become a pro pilot per se. I don't do this the way that they're doing it, but I do think that the way that people are doing it is very viable. And I'll get to the caveat later, because there are very few people that have, I'll just give you the caveat now. There's very few people that have penetrated through that are new pilots. Most of these people that are breaking through now have been flying 5 or 6 years. They were like OGs, not original super OG, like Sharpoo and Chad and like the people that were flying at that time, like 2014, that were Juz, Midwest Rob, all these guys. Like half those guys don't even fly anymore. But there was that generation right after that is technically still considered OGs, but they've been doing it for so long that it's just taken this long for them to make a name for themselves. And I kind of see that more frequently. Like you might find a guy, you're like, whoa, where'd this guy come from? And then you go realize, holy shit, this dude's been flying for 7 years and I've just never heard of him. And then you have the occasional person that breaks through that's newer, but still most of them that break through are like 3 to 5 years of solid effort. And then they finally break through with either a viral video or something, and it puts them on the map. And then what they do with that viral video, or how they go about making content after that video to bring more people in, to continue that perceived, like, hey, this person's actually doing cool things, then that's where it make or breaks the particular pilot that's trying to become in a pro space, I guess, or become more of a pro, someone that's getting hired to go do jobs.
Everybody I've talked to pretty much agrees that you have to have an online presence, that basically your online presence is sort of your resume for the people who are looking to hire you. But it sounds like you're saying that you don't necessarily need to be like a top well-known YouTube superstar to be known, because there's lots of guys who are working feature films, commercials, and so forth, and they don't necessarily have like the FPV community doesn't necessarily know them as top pilots. What kind of things should people be doing if they want to go pro, like actually make connections in the industry, get noticed by, production companies or directors of photography, the people who are actually going to be making hiring decisions, instead of somebody who just wants to have the next big YouTube viral video?
So as far as like becoming a professional pilot today, I think there are a handful of things that you could do that would put you in a good position to become pro. And, when most people think pro, they think of someone that's like super massive online and they're getting all these viral videos, views, and, then whatever Quentin Tarantino is calling them and being like, hey, I need you in Kill Bill 10. It's going to be sick. We're going to fly a drone through Uma Thurman's legs and crash into some dude's face. So, like there is that way, but I don't think that most people are ever going to achieve that, regardless of when they started or how much effort they put in, because it takes so many things to happen to make that happen. And like even myself, like I've put myself in all the right places, mainly all the right times, and there are still times that I've done things and I'd said no to a certain thing, and that was like the caveat, or not the caveat, that was the catalyst that pushed someone else, because I just didn't want to do it because, I didn't want to travel to a certain place at a certain time because I was doing something else. But if I had done that, then maybe it would have turned differently. So it all depends on where you are, how the timing, and then also if you have an online presence, how much you can maintain that. So I don't think that's a very viable way. I know that most of the people that are probably watching or listening to this are trying to figure out how they can become pro that's feasible. The ways that I would say are feasible are you need either an in, some sort of in. And when I say an in, it could be like you already work with a production company that doesn't have an FPV version, or they don't have FPV in their repertoire, and you are an FPV pilot and you're an accomplished pilot. So the difference between like a pro pilot and somebody that is flying FPV as a recreational thing, there's not that much of a difference. However, the main difference is, first of all, you need to be able to apply whatever you've learned under pressure and be able to repeat it over and over and over and over with some precision. Obviously, there are various levels of precision pilots out there, and I wouldn't even consider myself to be like the most precise pilot when it comes to cinema because of how hard it can be. I think a lot of people, they attribute like these crazy FPV racing pilots and crazy freestyle pilots as like the best pilots in the world. And yes, there are really good freestyle and really good race pilots. But when you talk about flying a camera through the air, you almost have to think about it as like the shot more so than the drone. So you're more flying the camera than you are flying the drone, and you have to know what looks good and what doesn't, and it either comes with experience from flying a camera and understanding how that works, or it comes from knowing how cameras work and how people have like predominantly used them in the past, because that's what you're kind of fighting with right now. Is cinema world wants a drone in their video, and they see these like crazy freestyle GoPro shots, and then they're like, we want that. And then you come in and they say, no, we don't want that. We want a dolly shot, and we want you to do it 50 times in a row, but we want you to punch through this tiny hole that's half the size of the drone. And we have to like explain, hey, that's not possible. So you have to know these things, and having an in with either a company that is already done something with production, like say you work for a company, and this is, again, I have a couple handfuls of ways that you could get into this. This is just one. But if you wanted to get into FPV drones and cinema and you wanted to do it professionally, it probably would be easier to get some kind of job in the movie industry or in the production industry that's not FPV. Maybe it's a camera op or something like that. And then also practicing your flying on the side, and then being like, hey, I fly these drones, and do you mind if I like take this thing up and like try this shot out? Because I'm already an accomplished, cam op, and you don't have to be a crazy A-cam operator on some feature film. It could just be like you're the camera guy for this, Kibbles and Bits retail store, and you just want to show these people how it works, and it might not ever lead to anything other than just helping with the marketing for that particular company, but at least it leads to something where it could potentially be a long-term, maybe one company thing. And that's where I see a lot of people going is they get in with one company and they do all of, it might be a corporate, say like corporate videos or something like that. They're doing all the corporate videos for this one company, and they're the FPV guy for that. And you don't have to be super well known for that. You can be a pro pilot, make a living doing whatever you want to do within this company. And then maybe another company will word of mouth you to someone else. And that's the next best thing, is word of mouth. Obviously, if you've done one job, you can get into another job if you did a good job in the previous one based on word of mouth. So it spreads really organically as far as how you get other jobs. There is some hustle involved, which I can talk about later, but right now I'm trying to give you the avenues of ways to be pro. So the one way is put in crazy years and effort and become the best pilot ever, and then do really cool things that people see online, and like your videos go viral. And that's like the hardest way to do it, I think. The second way would be have some kind of in with maybe a company or a corporation that you already know that is already doing something in your field, and you just apply FPV to it, or maybe expose those people to FPV, because FPV is still super unknown to most people. They see these shots and like, how'd they get that? Oh, it must be CGI. Well, let me show you it's not CGI, and this is how they did it. And you don't have to be the best pilot in the world to do that. And then like the third way, which is the way that I've seen more like popular people on Instagram, more so, like I feel like Instagram is probably the best place to be marketing like professional video. What they do is they go out and do things for free. So they go either to like like motocross or drifting events. and they fly and get this footage, and then they, either post that footage on YouTube or Instagram, mostly Instagram, and that footage is just there. And then they get in with the drivers and they give all the drivers their footage. And then the drivers start sharing it, and it becomes like this organic thing. Because if you want everyone to be excited about it, you don't want to be like, oh, hey, I'm going to do this job next week. I want this much money, and I don't want anyone else to be able to use the footage, and you're going to pay me for this, and that's how it's going to go. The drivers can't use it. Say you're doing a drift event, you're like, no one can use it, only this company. Versus going to an event, and people are trying to get in. So it's not like you can charge money in the beginning. You pretty much have to do things dirt cheap or completely free to show what you're worth and show your skill. And then you can become like, in with these people as far as like how you're perceived. Maybe you're a cool person. You're not the best pilot in the world, but personality has a lot to do with becoming professional in anything. It doesn't necessarily have to do with direct relation to FPV. I feel like, just getting a job in general is 90% personality and 10% skill in most cases. Everyone that I've ever met that was in a weird high position, very rarely do they impress me in their position. It's more the fact that they can perceive that position as like they do it really well in kind of expressing that position rather than actually doing it. So it's kind of the same in FPV. Not the best pilots in the world. You don't need to be the best pilot in the world to be professional in FPV. Like I said, it's not really about the precision. It's more about flying the camera.
So let's talk about that, because you've talked about that the people who sort of break through, a lot of times they've been grinding for years and years and years. How much skill as a pilot do you need before you start thinking about going pro? Or maybe more generally, how would somebody know, like I'm ready to try to start getting pro jobs versus maybe there's a red flag that you're not ready?
You need to be competent in building aircraft and then competent in flying them. And how you tell if you're competent in flying them is if you have other people around you that probably think you're a pretty good pilot, like you're not crashing every single time you go out. So the worst thing you can do on any job is crash. So if you feel like so I guess the best way to say this is if you're going out and flying and doing what you want to do, say you're not flying freestyle, you're just like doing cinematic stuff and you're flying a ducted drone and you're scooting around in houses and you're trying to get this certain type of footage, because that's really what sets people apart is what they do with the drone. It's not necessarily how good they do it. So I'll give you an example. On Instagram, I see all these like influencers that are starting to fly FPV, and they're fucking terrible. Forgive my French, but the quality of the flight is so noticeable within the actual footage that it like grates me because of how bad of a pilot they are. But regardless of how good of a pilot they are or how many times it took them to get the shot, they're just posting it for themselves and they're not really utilizing it for getting professional jobs. So like they're doing it recreationally and they're flying and getting these shots and then editing them and making cool content. So it's really about, depending on what you want to do. If you want to be pro, then I think you need to be a pretty proficient pilot. You need to be able to do the same exact thing multiple times and not even think about crashing. If you're thinking about crashing, especially if you're under pressure, because a lot of people can do this stuff not under pressure. You just go out in the field and circle a tree 5 times and keep it center frame and then come back in, land, change batteries and do it the other way. But, say there's like, I don't know, some dude behind you trying to have a conversation with you while you're doing that stuff. That's kind of where you need to draw the line of where you feel like you're proficient. And I'm not saying you need to be able to have some kind of trigonometry question being answered while you're flying, or some kind of mathematical equation being manipulated in some way, shape, or form while you're flying. But you definitely need to be able to have a casual conversation and do what you need to do and not worry about crashing. If you're worried about crashing, then you should get to the point where you're not worried about crashing. And that's when I think you can become or you could do it before, but that's the level that I would say, all right, now I can pursue being a pro pilot, because I'm no longer worried about flying the drone. It's more about I'm here to put the drone wherever someone needs me to put it. And that's kind of the line. And then it's a very blurry line, because when do you know that? Well, if you have to think about it, you will know when you get to that point. If you have to think about it, you're not there yet. You're like, I think I'm there. No, you're not there. Like when you get there, you'll know.
That's actually really, that might be the money quote from this whole interview, although you may top it later. What you made me think of there is like, if you're going to go be a professional musician, right? Mm-hmm. You should never be worried about like not remembering the song or missing a note. You need to be 100% sure you're going to play it correctly. And then you're going to get into interpretation. Like, how am I going to play it? Mm-hmm. But if you like forget the notes or like you're like going to miss a note or flub something, you just don't even need to be there. And it sounds like it's similar to what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's really good. That's really good.
Thanks.
Not worried about crashing. Yep. And you know your drone's not going to fall out of the air because you built it wrong. Like that's sort of a basic thing. You talked about there being pressure on set. And every single person I've talked to has talked about how the first time you get on set, suddenly like there's so much pressure. Can you talk about like what is the source of that extra pressure when you're on set? Why is it so much more pressure?
Being on set in general, there's always pressure on whoever having to perform at that particular time. So if you have, say, a shot being set up where there's two actors speaking to each other, and then you have a focus puller and a guy running camera, and they're on a dolly or something. Like, not only are the actors under pressure, but the cam op is under pressure to get the camera in the right position, and then you have the focus puller that's under pressure to make sure he's on whatever they need to be focused on the right time. So that's obviously open to interpretation. Like a good quality focus puller is going to pull focus in a certain way that maybe draws your attention to a certain thing in a particular time. And that might not be like, oh, well, when we pan off this guy's head, you're going to make that guy's head in focus. That's something that comes over time. There's like a feeling of how it's pulled. There's also a way that the camera is moved. All of these things, everyone has their specific way that they do it. And also, they have a particular pressure to do it right, because obviously if an actor messes up and everything else went in order, you got to repeat that over and over and over and over until everyone gets it right. Well, when a drone goes up, you have to be able to repeat the same drone movements over and over and over until everyone in the audience or whoever you're filming or whatever you're filming does what it needs to do. And communication is extremely important when you're flying or doing anything where you have multiple parties involved. And I find that drones specifically, they kind of get treated as toys up until like the last 6 to 8 months, maybe a year. We were pretty much flying GoPros only. There was no such thing as a red Komodo. There was no such thing as a Z-Cam. There was no such thing as like someone carrying an Alexa Mini on a drone, like a FPV drone or something like that. So up until that point, it was like we paid a bunch of money for this person or this team to come out and fly this toy. And it's like you're not taken seriously. So it's like almost no one else is taking you seriously, and things get messed up. Like communication is just terrible. I've been on so many sets where the communication between maybe the driver of the car that you're filming, or maybe the road isn't locked off, or maybe there is an extra that's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or there's just so many things that can go wrong that if you're not able to consistently do the exact same thing every time with the drone, which is hard because elevation, all these lateral movements, everything is different. The camera of the angle matters it's very significant as far as how much angle you have, how fast you're going. All of these things are super important. And you have to be able to like decipher the situation. And then if something goes wrong, you need to be able to repeat that over and over and over and over so that it's not your fault that the shot's not happening and it's someone else's fault, because you know, you're being paid a lot. Like the drone rates are not cheap. You're probably one of the highest paid people on the entire set, aside from maybe the director. But yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily overly stressful. But when you think about it from how many things have to go right to get the shot, it can be stressful. And I try not to think about it like that so that I don't get stressed. I'm pretty calm on set. Very rarely do I actually get stressed out, but I haven't ever been fatigued, which we can talk about in a little bit, because you would think I don't get fatigued flying FPV. I've never have. I can fly 30, 40 batteries and I'm fine. But when you're under pressure and you're flying and you're having to do like super finite movements, it can be fairly fatiguing, especially if you're, having to do this all day and there's external factors that are happening. Maybe there's a lot of wind And the people that are, on set don't realize that, hey, a 30-mile-an-hour wind causes a major problem when you're trying to go 5 miles an hour and orbit a human 5 inches away from their face with a Komodo, an abducted drone that doesn't already fly well. So there's a lot of like things you have to take into consideration that can potentially bring you stress, whether it's your fault or not.
What do you think the most number of times you had to repeat a shot was?
Actually, the most times ever was recently. I did a shot in Charlotte, or I did a shoot in Charlotte where I had to repeat. We did 3 days, and it was drone was ACAM. It was for a company called Honeywell, and we did this same shots about 50 to 60 times over 3 days. I did 3 different shots, 50 to 60 times, back to back to back to back to back to back to back every day. It's like 6 to 8 hours of same shot, same shot, same shot, same shot. Something would go wrong every time, and it was never. It wasn't always. It was not never my fault, but it was very rarely my fault. It was a lot of like, we got the shot perfectly, but the actor did a thumbs up and they didn't like the thumbs up. There's always, the client is always changing their mind after they say they want one thing, you do that thing, and they're like, nah, we don't like that. Let's try this. And they just have no idea how drones work. So you're constantly battling between client and then what the creative says, and then you are technically creative as well because you're the one flying the aircraft, and there's no fixed path. You have like a general guideline of what you need to follow, but like how you do that and the way that you do it is definitely super subjective to your particular flying style. And then you have client that has no idea about drones. They're just like random people from the office that are thrown into this, that are like social media coordinators, and they're like, oh well, what, the whole shoot's a drone? How does a drone work? Can we like put it inside this helicopter and fly it up to 5,000 feet and then immediately have it here? And we need it to be less than 10 seconds as far as the clip's concerned. So can the drone do 1,000 miles an hour? And just like all these super crazy things that you just would never expect to be thought of are always thought of and brought to you. Even to this day, I get dumbass questions all the time, or requests, I should say.
Yeah. You just gave an example of one, like can the drone go 1,000? Can it get from point A to point B in an unrealistic amount of time?
Yeah.
Can you think of another example of like the person just didn't get the limitations of the technology?
For example, on this Honeywell job that I just did, there was like this area we were shooting inside a factory where there were a bunch of automated robots like moving their arms and stuff. And most of the time it's timing related. So it's either timing related or framing related. So with an FPV drone, obviously, there's no gimbal. It's all like you manipulating how the camera works. So if the camera leans left because you needed to slow down or bank left, then that's you because you had to fly it that way. There's no way to mitigate that currently. There are ways to mitigate the camera tilt, but it's like the drone gets bigger and it becomes more and more cumbersome. So if you want like a small drone with something like a Komodo on it, and you want it to fit and manipulate in areas or maneuver within areas that are tight and confined, and you want it to be safe around humans, you got a 2, maybe 3 minute flight time, and you have a certain size that you have to have. There's no way to make it any smaller. So you have physical limitations. And in this particular job, they were like, well, we want you to fly through this railing, which is fine. I can do that. We want you to fly past this robot that's going to do this inconsistently because it's an assembly line that we have no control over and it's just doing random things all the time. So like, we want you to fly in a straight line, no movement at all. You can't speed up, slow down, turn, manipulate anything. It has to be just perfectly straight, and it has to go through the guardrail, through the robots. And then once you get to the person, you have to orbit that person, and you have to maintain this perfect elevation. And I don't know if you've ever tried to orbit anything, or I'm sure you have because you fly, but people that maybe don't fly, orbiting is very difficult, especially with a ducted drone. When you put a duct on something, the yaw is actually affected quite significantly by the air not being able to get off the end of the prop. So there was this thing a long time ago, the QAV 250. They had these, it was an old drone that it was like 2015, 16 it came out. But anyways, it had these plastic covers that went around the outside of the body to protect it from dirt and grass. Well, all of a sudden the drone started flying like total crap. And people were like, why does it fly like crap? I don't know. All it do is put this plastic on here. And I saw it come back a few years ago. And people were like, look at this. It's an innovation. Amazing. You can never have drone filled with grass and dirt ever again because you're going to put this little guardrail on the outside. And it went away in a month because obviously it had already happened and already failed. But it's funny to see these things come in waves. But that was a side tangent from the fact that just the drone that has ducks on it doesn't orbit very well. So like doing all of that and then not turning the camera, like you have to bank to initiate an orbit. Otherwise, you're going, like, you can come in, or you can pitch forward and kind of start to yaw, and it'll put you into an orbit. But there's like almost no way to not manipulate the controls to put yourself in an orbit. So you're trying to manipulate all these things in this certain way. And then at the end, they're like, well, we want you to go slow here, but we want you to go faster here. And then we need to just slow down right here. And I'm like, well, to do that, I have to pitch forward. And they're like, you can't pitch forward. And I was like, well, I can't do the shot. And they're like, well, then are you a good pilot? I didn't say I couldn't do the shot, but like, this is what's going through the minds of people. It's like, you do realize there are limitations to this. You wouldn't hire a Steadicam operator to do this job. Well, you hired a drone pilot to do it, but then the drone has its physical limitations as well. I'm telling you what the physical limitations are. This is your option. So we did the shot a certain way, and there's just always it never goes where I get on a shoot and they're like, you have free reign to do whatever you want. Just get shots and then, we'll use them. It's always like, we want this shot, and it never goes the way that they want. But 90% of the time they're extremely overly satisfied, but it just goes to show you that like what you're getting into is not necessarily what you think you're getting into. Everything is different. Every shoot I've ever been on has turned out completely differently than you think it's going to go, which is to be expected now. So I just go in with no expectations and have fun.
Earlier, you said that the drone operator is probably one of the most highly paid people on the set. I was really surprising to me. I think it'd probably be surprising to the people watching. Can you talk about like why is the drone operator the most highly paid person on the set?
So drone operators are making like really good rates right now, specifically when I'm talking FPV drone. I'm not talking about like heavy lift or Inspire. This is specific to FPV. Like drone operators in general make good money, but when you talk about like FPV specifically, it's such a niche thing that there are only so many quote unquote vetted pilots that are allowed to fly on certain sets, and people are going after these names. They want specific names for specific shoots. So when you get hired for a shot that is like with a feature film or through a company that's like vetted, they can charge basically, within reason, but really whatever they want for the pilot itself, because they're asking for the pilot. So it's almost like you want it. So if you want it, you're going to pay for it. So when you go on set and you're the FPV pilot, especially on a big film, like when I work with Lightcraft, for example, which is a FPV company based out of, or not FPV, they're a drone company based out of LA, and they do a lot of feature film work, commercial work, anything that has to do with production and drones. And they have all different variations of ducted FPV drones, open blade FPV drones, heavy lift drones, Inspires, Mavics, like whatever you need. But because these people are specifically asking for FPV, and FPV is such a niche thing, and they're going to this company that's already vetted, and it's like the drone pilot as a pilot, because it's so specialized, gets paid way more than anyone else on the crew and even on the set. So like most of the sets that we've been on, it's like, I find it to be criminal how low they pay the like PAs and stuff. Like I wouldn't even take the covers off my face it's not like I wouldn't get out of bed to do it. I wouldn't even move and come to these sets for what these people are doing. But because they have to like go through this whole, like, put your dues thing, like, right? Like these people want to get in the movie industry, and the way to do that in this traditional way is you be a PA, and then, you're a PA for a couple of years, and then you move up to like a director or a PA, not a movie director, but like a personal assistant director, and you boss other PAs around, and then you might, I want to do cameras, and then you become whatever, a grip, and then you move into cam op, and like it just goes down this path. But because there's so many variations and levels of the hierarchy of this movie set, the drone op is kind of this weird thing where it's a new tool and they want it, but they don't really they can't get it anywhere else, so they have to pay for it significantly. So this is like the same thing when arm cars first came out. Arm cars didn't exist, and then all of a sudden these crazy shots are possible with an arm car. Well, there's only one arm car in the world, and they got to pay that one company to bring their car out that has the arm on it, and they got to strap whatever camera they want. And there are still today only certain amounts of arm car companies that are getting production or feature film jobs, and there are only so many arm cars in the world, and there are only so many maybe helicopter pilots that are able to fly on certain films. Like these dudes are, they're hired specifically because they have the tool, and it's the same thing with FPV. So you have like the pilots that are already vetted and already in the system as far as like who they've worked with, and then you have the companies that they work for, or if they're just a sole proprietor, then there's that, and they have their own vetted entity with themselves. Then you have the tools. Do you have the right tools? And can you actually make the shot happen? And that's another thing. Like if you have all of these other things and then you don't get the shot, then you start to ding your credibility. So you have to be able to have all of these things and then continue to perform. And then your resume just builds and builds and builds, and then ultimately you can get whatever job. But there's always going to be people that'll do it cheaper, and that's kind of what you're trying to mitigate. In the beginning, you pretty much do everything for free, and then you eventually get to a point where you can start charging. And then at the elite level, you get to a point where essentially people are asking specifically for you, and then you can pretty much charge whatever you want. And I think that's what people think FPV and pro are synonymous with. Like I want to be a pro FPV pilot, they just assume they're going to be making six figures overnight because they're a good FPV pilot, and that's just not how it works.
You were pretty clear that, when people start asking for you by name, obviously that's the point where you can kind of charge almost whatever you want. Mm-hmm. And that in the beginning, you're going to be doing it for free just to sort of make connections and build a portfolio. Mm-hmm. Some people have said that you really shouldn't do the work for free, that you should always take money, because once you establish that you're doing it for free, then it's really hard to transition. What's your take on like when to do something for free versus when you should charge some? How do you make that decision?
So this is the same, this is a very simple answer, so I won't ramble forever. This is the same exact scenario of getting sponsored as when you like understand to charge to fly FPV. You need to offer a service that is wanted, or offer something that someone wants to be able to be paid or compensated for it. If you are just someone that is doing the same thing that everybody else is doing, why would you pay? Why would someone pay for that? So that's my quick, easy answer is like, are you offering something that cannot be provided by anyone else? And if you aren't, then you're not there yet to be charging or being sponsored. That makes sense.
So it sounds like you're saying that as long as you are trying to build your skills, when you're not at a point where you can say, I'm going to deliver value for you, but you're sort of getting value from the customer, the quote unquote customer, that's when you do it for free. As soon as you reach a point where you're providing value, that's when you need to start charging.
Yes, the value thing, it needs to be either an equal street, or it always needs to be equal, but whether or not the equality comes with payment is the thing. So like, say for example, when you see guys, I don't know if you've ever been handed a mixtape before, like people out, like, hey man, check out my mixtape. Like that dude, this was before the internet. So this is before like pre-labeled, people couldn't just like put their music up on the internet and, people would listen to it. But for example, even if you're doing that, putting your music up on the internet, there's so many people also putting their music up on the internet. Why is your music better than anyone else's? And I'm just giving you a kind of translation into how this works in other industries. And because it's the same exact thing, I think people think of FPV as this new special thing, and it's not anything different. And this is the whole business side of FPV as well. Like this industry has been around since the beginning of industries. It's just, you have to understand that there's certain things that happen, and the way that they happen is pretty universal. I don't think it's so special. So if you're doing something that is mediocre and the same exact thing that everyone else is doing, then do something that's not maybe the particular thing that you're trying to be good at or be pro at, that helps make you stand out. So for me, an example, in the beginning when I was flying FPV and I wanted to like make videos for YouTube, like a lot of my videos that got a lot of traction were things that were like kind of frowned upon in the world of FPV and the frowned upon in the drone world. Like, you know, when drones were popular in 2015, like the term, this is before we caved into actually calling them drones. This is when we were fighting like, no, it's a quadcopter. You cannot call it a drone. That's a big military device that blows things up. And we eventually lost that battle and everyone calls it a drone now. But yeah, like there was this big thing about drones and the stigma of the term drone. And I remember like, I just used this thing like a skateboard. So I'd go out and fly and like, you know, slide down stair sets and grind handrails and like fly in places that most people would consider to be maybe a little more dangerous because I'm flying around a building and I could crash into a window and break it, which I've never done. So 7 years of flying, I've never crashed and broken anything on any building ever. So that's another thing when you fly freestyle, like please be an adequate pilot before you go start flying around these ridiculously expensive buildings, and don't stick stickers on a building that's in use that's hundreds of millions of dollars. You people, you know who you are. There's like a couple spots in Atlanta that people go to and fucking stick stickers on shit. That's an active building right next to a military base. Cool. You're doing a great job. Thanks for making the hobby great. But yeah, like it's just something that you gotta kind of ride the edge, and you can go hardcore and go off the deep end, but just know that it's going to come with consequences. Like if you go do something that's extraordinarily dangerous, say, you know, for example, this is a good example of something that's dangerous and like cutting edge, but not necessarily dangerous in a way that would put someone in, because you're worried about other people. You're not worried about you or your equipment. I'm worried about other people's property and other people in general. And the older you get, the more you care about that stuff. When I was 24 and I started flying drones, I didn't give a shit. So I just did whatever I wanted, and I knew my skill set and I wasn't going to hurt anybody. But, you know, maybe someone else that didn't know me would be like, oh, this guy's reckless and he's doing these things that are completely it's going to hurt somebody. Well, yeah, you just didn't understand that I was confident in my skills, and I was to the point where I knew that I wasn't going to crash. So it's like, you don't know until you know. And at that point I was like, yeah, I'm at this level now. I'm good. I'm not getting paid, but I know that I can do these things without crashing, and I trust my gear. But for that example, like flying near an active volcano, there have been a few people recently in the last year that have flown drones near active volcanoes. And it's like this really, really risky shot to get because there's so many things to be involved with that. Like you have these extremely high temperatures, you have usually extreme distance because you don't want to be close to the thing physically yourself. So you got like these long range flights. You have, maybe you want to go at like dusk or sometime later in the evening so that the lighting is better. There's all these things that you had to think about and you had to overcome to get the shot. And then you post the shot and it generally goes viral. Like every single volcano shot I've ever seen is pretty much a viral shot. Whether or not you used that to become and catapult yourself into a position, yeah, some people do it better than others, but you know, that was like one shot that I could relate to. That was like, hey, this was extremely hard to get and dangerous and cutting edge. And not everyone has access to an active volcano. So it's not like everyone can do that shot, but you kind of get the idea. Like you're doing things that are thinking outside of the box per se, not necessarily dangerous in a way of like flying around moving cars on an unclosed highway or just like a random highway that people don't know what you're doing. But just doing something that's, you know, it looks dangerous, feels dangerous, but is not really that dangerous.
Can you think of a time, like an oh shit moment, where you know something messed up for you, and how it's like a job interview question, I feel, but like a time when something went like really wrong and you had to scramble and cover, and like what kind of, how your preparation helped you be prepared for that, or how you recovered through your skills or equipment. See what I'm asking? Like a real time, you know, like you took off and your battery wasn't charged and your quad tanked out, or something, you know, prop exploded, fell on Vin Diesel's head. I don't know.
I mean, I can think of a couple examples. Most of the examples, I'll just give you one example. So we did this NHL thing like earlier this year, and obviously national, or whatever NHL stands for, National Hockey League. I don't know. It's obviously over ice. This was not roller skating. This was ice hockey. So we're in an environment that's extremely cold. All of the gear has to be in this environment because it's just, you can't just be like running in and out of the door because we're filming the whole time. You can't run batteries back and forth. So we're all inside this cold area. And like we're flying a ducted drone because I'm flying around, superstar hockey athletes. And, the drone that we were flying, it's funny because the producers always want the heaviest shit. They're always like, oh, we don't like the 8 mil. We want the 15 mil. And the 15's like literally 3 times the weight of the 8 mil. And, you're flying an aircraft that already barely gets 2 minutes of flight time in a cold place. And you have the heaviest lens you could possibly run on it. And then they're like, hey, can we run a VAXIS system, which is like a HD downlink between the actual camera, not the FPV camera, like the Komodo. And then they would see it on a screen. We're like, no, you're not getting that. You already fucking told us to put the 15 mil on. So you have to like mitigate these things. But anyways, I'm taking off, flying around doing these things. And then at one point I told them, I was like, with a small drone, I was like, I'm going to use the drone as a puck. I'm going to skid on the ice. And then I'm going to basically pass myself to this hockey player. I'm going to skid on the ice and this dude's going to start, whatever you call it, juggling me down the track or down the court. And then he's going to slap shot. And when he slap shots, I'm going to take off and fly into the net or fly into the hockey guy's, the goalie's glove or whatever. So it was like a very weird and like a really cool shot. Honestly, it came out like super well in the end. But the fact that they wanted to try it with the Komodo, I was like, I don't know if we're going to crash this Komodo into this dude's hand. But they did want me to skid on the ice with it, which it worked. But the problem is the drone that we were using, what would happen is the ice would spray up inside the drone and then it would be ice. But then as soon as like the ESCs got hot, which are hot all the time, but they have like video transmitter, you have all these electronics getting hot inside there and it melted the ice. And then like the drone would start acting super weird. It wouldn't fall out of the sky, but it would like drop a motor for half a second. And you're only 5-10 feet off the ground at this point. So it's like, whoa, like what the heck happened? And then also the demand on the gear was extremely high. So there were multiple times where I'd be flying back at like, I'm at 22 volts and then within 5 feet, it drops to 18 and I just have to like ditch it in the middle of the hockey rink, which fortunately it's not super far away. So, it's not that big of a deal, but it doesn't look good when the drone just like drops out of the sky in the middle of the rink and you have this pro athlete, that they only have for 20 or 30 minutes to do these shots with. And then we have to have a guy run out there and grab it. So, there's a lot of things that you just have to kind of mitigate and you either try to say that you have to change the way that you're doing it to become more safe, or there's like this margin of safety when you're flying on a set, and it's like the drone can physically do this, but is there a reality of something possibly happening because we're pushing the limit? Like for those drones, normally they fly for 2 minutes, and we were flying for like 1:45. We should have probably been flying for a minute so that we have some leeway in case something happens. Maybe we're running 2 batteries in parallel. Maybe one of the batteries is at storage voltage and one of the batteries is at full charge. So it looks like on paper I started out with a 24.5 volt battery, but in reality that one is was already discharged, and now that it's sucked down that one because it's a tiny battery. There's just so many little things that can go wrong, and you have to constantly know all these things and know what's gone wrong to even look for things in the future. So experience is another thing when you talk about why people are getting paid a lot on set as far as these top name pilots. It's more you're paying for the experience of the problems that they've already had that they notice without even thinking about it. And that's the biggest difference between someone that's a vetted pro pilot now, that's like a veteran. They have the experience to know when something isn't right. And that's what you're paying for. You're not paying for this pro crazy pilot that can put a drone anywhere. You are in a sense, but you're more paying for the experience of knowing when to say no or when to change something to make it more safe, because you definitely do not want to crash into anything or even crash on set. I know people do it all the time. I know that it's super common and it's kind of expected, but as far as a crash, I've never crashed and I don't ever intend to crash. Obviously no one does, but it happens. But the whole idea is I've been doing shoots for 7-8 years now, or 7 years, and never have I completely lost a drone other than that failsafe onto the track. Like when you crash on set, it's like you touch something with the props. Like that's barely acceptable. If the drone goes down, like that's not acceptable at all. So just, you need to know the limitations of the equipment before you go on, try to put it around people that don't know what they're dealing with.
One piece of advice for somebody, their first day of work on their first job, what would it be?
You need to take it seriously, but at the same time, like this is, like I feel like if you're treating it, it should be fun to you. So have fun, because if it's not fun, then you don't want to be doing it. This is the whole conundrum that I've had with FPV in general over the last 7-8 years. Like I love FPV, and making it a job has almost made it not fun anymore sometimes. That's why I don't do a lot of commercial work. The only reason I'm doing it now is because, one, I find it fairly easy and I enjoy the people that I work with, but the money's so good, it's like you shouldn't be passing this opportunity up in my shoes. But as far as like the last couple years that I had slowed down, I know at the beginning of this you said, you've been doing it for a long time, but I stopped doing it for a couple years because I hated dealing with all the crap that you have to deal with when you're trying to set one of these up. So if you've gone through all the hoops and jumps and you're on your first job and you're like ready to set up and just, you got everything prepped, you're good to go. Hopefully you have someone else there with you, because working alone on set with a drone can be extremely daunting, especially if you're like the main camera, like you're an A cam, you're not just like a B cam, like flying around doing random stuff. Just make sure that that's what you want to do, and that you can at least enjoy the time that you're there, and you don't completely focus in on providing the service. Because I think if you're going in with the mindset of I'm going to provide a service and ultimately make a lot of money out of it, then you're not going to be good at it. I think that goes to be said with almost everything. Like if you don't enjoy what you do, then you're not going to do it for very long, first of all. And then the stuff that you do, it's not going to really have any true color to it, because you're just there to, like, I don't know, do a service. And that's what I said, a little bit of a thing earlier about PAs. Like they don't love being a PA, but they're thinking about the fact that when they get to be a cam op or something like that, they enjoy doing that, and they enjoy being around cameras, and they enjoy being around that environment. So whether or not you love flying drones or not, whether or not you enjoy just being on set, that might be something that you're more interested in than flying the drone aspect. But just enjoy something about it and don't overthink it, because you can easily overthink a shot and make it way more complex than it needs to be, and way harder on yourself. Just take what they say, make it fun, and do your thing, and I guarantee you they will usually accept it with open arms and be like super overwhelmed with how good it was, because you did it in your form and you had a good time doing it.
Anything else you think that we might have overlooked, or anything else you want to make sure gets included? Final
thoughts for becoming a professional drone pilot is, one, if you enjoy FPV and you love it and you want to make a career out of it, just know that when you do make a career out of it, there's going to be times where you don't love it anymore, because it's almost like it's a job. And that's a huge line that I think a lot of people don't realize, is when you become on that cusp of making a passion a career, it can almost seem like it's going to be the best thing in the world because you get to do what you love every day. But you do start to resent maybe doing the thing that you love, because you don't get to do it when you want to do it. You get to do it when people tell you to do it. So at the end of the day, just make sure that you're doing what you want to do and not what you think is going to make you the most money. Because I can tell you right now that FPV as a lucrative business, it's only going to be good. It's kind of like early investment in crypto. Like there's only so many people that became these crazy billionaires or millionaires off of crypto investment. Like, yes, there are more coins and more things to invest in now that you could potentially make money on, but there's a huge risk as well. And not everyone's going to be able to put in that risk, put in that time, or, have these things to be able to invest in their time and effort into something that ultimately they don't know if it's going to pay off for them. So just do what you like to do. And if it becomes a job, there are ways about doing it to make it fun, but really you just need to focus on like making your passion something interesting that people want. And that's the thing I say about sponsorships. People ask me all the time. They're like, "Hey, how do I get sponsored?" It's like, well, what do you offer to the people that you're asking for sponsorship? Like, yes, you're going to get free gear, but are you going to sell gear for them? Like, are people going to see your stuff and be inspired and be like, "What's that guy using?" So just, be cautious when you're trying to become a pro in anything you do, because you may not actually want that, and you may just be blinded by the fact that you think it's a very lucrative career.
Nice, good. Cool, man. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your afternoon. I know everybody's going to be very interested to hear your perspective.